And Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, has promised those who call upon Him that He will respond to him. And someone may say, I have made dua, but I have not been answered. You can hear this, and people say this. I made dua, but I've not been answered. Shaykh al-Fawzan said, the response is to say, the preventing factor, meaning if your dua has not been answered, then the preventing factor is from you yourself. Dua, supplication, is a means from the means. And the result will not be attained unless all the preventing factors are removed. So it may be that some preventing factor has prevented your dua from being answered. And then Shaykh al-Fawzan mentions a number of factors that could be preventing the answer to your dua. And it means if it's not being answered, it's your fault. You're the one who is stopping it being answered by having with you a preventing factor. Then he gives some of these preventing factors. He says, either because you made dua with a heart that was inattentive and distracted. You weren't paying attention when you were making dua. You're saying the words upon your tongue, but your heart was not attentive to what you were saying. With a heart that was distracted and inattentive. Then how can an inattentive and distracted heart be answered? As occurs in the hadith. So this is the first factor that Shaykh al-Fawzan mentioned, the first preventing factor that can prevent your dua being answered. As he said, as occurs in the hadith. And as for the hadith, and the Shaykh didn't mention it, but there is a hadith that can be mentioned, the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, who said, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Ud'u Allah wa antum muqinuna bil ijabah. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَسْتَجِيبُ دُعَاءً مِنْ قَلْبٍ غَافِلٍ لَاهٍ. The hadith that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, make dua to Allah whilst being certain of being answered, and know that Allah does not respond to a supplication from a heart which is inattentive and distracted. The hadith reported by Tirmidhi and declared Hasan, good, by Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah. And just again a side point to the side point, then Al-Munawi said in explanation of this hadith, where it's mentioned, Ud'u Allah wa antum muqinuna bil ijaba, make dua to Allah and you are certain, with certainty of being answered. Al-Munawi said, meaning that you are upon a condition, you're in a state that means that your supplication deserves to be answered, that your intention is made pure, and that your heart is attentive, your heart is paying attention, and that you are doing acts of obedience with your limbs, and avoiding that which is forbidden, and avoiding slander, and you are inwardly attentive to the Most Merciful. So that's the first preventing factor that Shaykh al-Fawzan mentions. That person makes dua and he's not even thinking about what he's saying. His heart is not attentive. Then he mentions the second factor. He said, or that you are eating that which is haram. You are devouring that which is forbidden, and drinking that which is forbidden, and wearing that which is forbidden. He, alayhi salatu wassalam, said, with regard to the person, يُطِيلُ السَّفَرِ أَشْأَثَ أَغْبَارِ يَمُدُّ يَدَيْهِ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ يَا رَبِّ يَا رَبِّ يَا رَبِّ وَمَطْعَمُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَلْبَسُهُ حَرَامٌ وَغُذِيَ بِالْحَرَامِ فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. The hadith that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said about that there would be a person who had been travelling for a long time, with his hair dishevelled and dusty, he raises up his hands to the heavens, saying, O my Lord, O my Lord, O my Lord. And his food is haram, forbidden things. And his clothing is forbidden. And he has been nourished with what is forbidden. How can he be answered? How can he be answered? In a footnote they mention the hadith reported by Muslim. It's from a hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. And again, as a side point, in explanation of this, in Al-Mishkat, some of the explainers, Al-Tibi, he brings a quote from someone from before, in explanation of this hadith, saying that this refers to a man who's performing Hajj. I mean, he's been travelling for a long time, to go and perform Hajj. And that he's therefore, his hair is dishevelled and he's dusty because of that journey. He's on the journey performing Hajj. And he said, and he's been striving, and therefore he's become covered in dust and his hair dishevelled. And then, in that condition, with all that, he calls upon Allah. And that being a time when it is expected that he should be responded to. However, because of the fact that he's wearing that which is forbidden, and so on. That's what prevents him. Then Shaykh Fawzan, Hafidhullah, he mentions the third possible preventing factor, he said. Or that he is making dua for something sinful, or for the cutting of ties of kinship. So he is not answered. This is from one aspect. And then from a second aspect, I mean, that could be the first reason. If a person is apparently not being answered, it could be because of one of these three reasons. Maybe he really is not being answered. And the reason is with himself. And it can be one of these three reasons here. Then the Shaykh said, and then from a second aspect, that Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, He knows best about whatever is most beneficial for you. He may give you the response sooner, or He may delay it for you until later, or He may avert for you an evil like it, and you don't know. In other words, maybe you are being answered to. If you've got no preventing factor, maybe you are being answered, but you don't realize it. In one of these three ways. Maybe you're going to get it very soon, that Allah will grant you that thing. Or later on at some time that you don't know when, Allah will grant it to you. Maybe at a time when you need it more. Or the third thing, that maybe you can't see any answer, but maybe there was some evil that was going to come and hit you that you didn't even know about. But because of your dua for something, Allah stopped that evil from hitting you. And you never even realized. Then the Shaykh said, as occurs in the hadith, مَا مِن رَجُلٍ يدعو الله بدعوة ليس فيها إثم ولا قطيعة رحم إلا أعطاه بها إحدى ثلاث إما أن يعجل دعوته وإما أن يؤخرها له وإما أن يصرف عنه من السوء مثلها. He said, as occurs in the hadith, there is not a man who makes supplication to Allah with a supplication which does not contain any sin, nor any cutting off of ties of kinship, except that He will give him, because of it, one of three things. Either He will hasten to give him the response of his call, of his supplication, or He will delay it for him for later on, or He will repel from him its like from evil. In a footnote they mention, reported by Tirmidhi. And this hadith is reported by Tirmidhi from a number of the companions in different narrations, from a hadith of Jabir radiallahu an, and a hadith of Abu Hurairah, and a hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu an. All of the first two been declared Hasan, good by Shaykh al-Albani, and the last one been declared Sahih, authentic by Shaykh al-Albani, all with similar wording to this. Then Shaykh al-Fawzan said, the people of misguidance, they say, there is no need to make dua. Since if an affair has already been decreed to occur, then there's no need for supplication. I mean, if Allah has already decreed it's going to happen, they say, then there's no need to make dua for it. Since if a matter has already been decreed for you, then it will certainly come to you, even if you don't make dua. And if it has not been decreed for you and not ordained to occur, then even if you make dua, it will not, or you will not attain it, and it will not be decreed. The Shaykh said, answering this argument they make, this is misguidance, and Allah's refuge is sought. And it is something contrary to the speech of Allah the Mighty and Majestic. In other words, it's contrary to the fact that Allah has commanded us to make dua. And it's contrary to the fact that Allah has said that He will answer our dua. So all of this argument runs contrary to that. Shaykh said, and the answer is, there is no contradiction between making dua, making supplication, and between what has been decreed and ordained and preordained. No contradiction between dua and pre-decree, al-qada wal-qadr. He said, because the one who preordained and pre-decreed, He is the same one who commanded with dua, who commanded with us that we make supplication. And supplication, dua, is a means from the means. And the one who brings about the results is Allah, the Mighty and Majestic. And there are some things which have been decreed to occur based upon the means. If their means are present, then the results occur. And supplication is a means. If you remember just a small example of that, when Sheikh Falah Ismail, Hafidhullah, when he was here last time, he made an example of this. This saying that people, when they don't use the means, and like of the Sufis, they don't apply the means correctly, and they say, I don't use the means, I just rely upon Allah to give me whatever I want. And he gave the example of a person who wants a child. He wants to have a child, and he doesn't get married, he doesn't have a wife. He says, if Allah wishes, He'll provide a child for me. You know, out of where? Out of thin air? That no. You go through the means that are necessary, and then if Allah decrees, you get the child. If Allah decrees, you won't. But first you apply the means. And then finally, that's the end of where Shaykh al-Fawzan explains. Just one final point which I didn't read as well. With regard to the hadith, مَنْ لَا يَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ يَغْضَبُ عَلَيْهِ, that whoever does not ask of Allah, then Allah becomes angry with him. As we heard, the hadith reported by Ahmad at Tirmidhi and declared Hasan good by Shaykh al-Albani. Then the explainer at Tirmidhi, al-Mubarak Furi, he mentioned in explanation of this, he said, how fine is the statement that has been said, I mean explanation of this hadith, or a point that's connected, a nice point connected to it. He said, Allah becomes angry if you leave off asking of Him. Allah becomes angry if you leave off. If you don't ask of Him, Allah becomes angry. Whereas the sons of Adam, the people, when you ask them, they become angry. And the people are the opposite. So how free is Allah from that? Allah, if you don't ask Him, He becomes angry with you. As for the people, you ask, you're in need, you ask them, they become angry. Go away from me, leave me alone. Don't ask me, go away. As for Allah, He becomes angry if you don't ask Him. Rather, He has commanded us that we ask and make dua. We'll leave the next point until next time, inshaAllah. Any points of clarification?
From it, like an evil.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like?
Mean that, yeah, that if, I mean, the third way, the hadith reported about Tirmidhi from the different companions, the third way in which Allah may be answering, obviously if a person can't see in front of his eyes, he can't see the dua being answered, obviously it could be the first case he needs to look, is it one of the first cases, am I doing something which is stopping my dua being answered? Then if not, then maybe it's the second case, maybe it is being answered but you don't know. So either that Allah is going to give it to you, if you just that you need to have some patience for a short time, or later on you will get it. Maybe even in the next life you get it instead. You get it with something far better. You get a pile of reward instead of the measly thing that you asked for. Allah grant me such and such from this dunya. And maybe Allah will give you something from the hereafter that will last forever. Allahu a'lam. Or the third way, that Allah keeps away evil of its like. I mean, what you asked for something, whatever you asked for, that you don't get that actual thing. Maybe you don't need that thing. Instead of it, that there's an amount of evil that's going to come and hit you, some certain trial or tribulation or something, or that your wealth is going to be struck by to a certain degree, so you lose a certain amount of wealth or the like, because of your dua for something else. Allah doesn't give you that thing, He keeps that evil away from you. That evil doesn't hit you. You don't suffer that loss because of your making dua. And it's a point in case someone sometimes misunderstands as well, that dua itself is from Allah's pre-decree. The dua is from pre-decree as well. It's pre-decreed that so-and-so would make dua, and therefore as a result of his dua, he will get such and such. And that another person, so-and-so, it was decreed that he was not going to make dua, and so therefore he will not get such and such. That's part of pre-decree. So it shows the foolishness of those people who say, like the argument that Shaykh al-Fawzan refuted here, like of the Sufis who say, we don't make dua. Allah knows what we need. We don't need to make dua. Why should we try and make out and inform Allah of what He already knows? Rather, He'll grant us. And they say, if it's already written for us, we'll get it anyway. So we don't need to make dua. This shows foolishness of that fact that Allah has decreed that certain people will make dua, as He commanded them to make dua. He commanded us to make dua, and He decreed that certain people would make dua, and He decreed that as a result of their dua they would get such and such. And He also decreed there would be certain foolish people who take that foolish argument and say there's no need to make dua, and so therefore as a result of the foolishness they don't get such and such and such and such. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah. As for the hadith that Allah, man la yas'alullah yaghdabu alayhi, Allah does, or the hadith that whoever does not ask of Allah, whoever does not make request of Allah, then Allah becomes angry with him. Hadith reported by Ahmad and at Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah and Al-Hakim. Shaykh al-Albani said about the hadith, it is Hasan, it is good hadith. Was the point clear with regard to the two types? I mean, the two types of worship, the two types of dua, the common type of dua, the dua of mas'ala, the dua of asking, and dua which is present in an act of worship itself. Is that clear? Yeah,